I'm Blake, and I'm 29 years old. Christmas Eve was supposed to be the night my family found out they were finally getting a grandchild. Instead, it turned into the night. My own father looked me straight in the eye across the dinner table and erased me from his life with one sentence. The house was full of polished silverware, expensive wine, and fake smiles. I waited until everyone had taken a bite of prime rib, set my fork down, and said as calmly as I could, "I'm pregnant." For half a second, no one moved. My mother's hand froze around her glass. My sister stared at me like she was watching a movie. My father leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, his eyes cold in a way I'd never seen before. He didn't ask who the father was. He didn't ask if I was happy or healthy. He didn't ask anything. He just said a few quiet, careful words about my baby that I won't repeat here. Then added, "You are not part of this family anymore. You are out of the will." That was it. Years of doing everything right, wiped out between the salad and dessert. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I reached under my chair, took the small, perfectly wrapped present I had brought just for him, and set it in the middle of the table. Then I pushed back my chair, wished everyone a Merry Christmas, and walked out of that house. Before I tell you what he said next, and what he did when he opened that box, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I want to see how far this story travels. I drove down the winding oak-lined driveway of the estate for the last time. The gravel crunched under my tires like the sound of bones breaking. But my hands on the steering wheel were steady, bone dry. Most daughters would be blinded by tears right now. Most daughters would be hyperventilating, wondering how they were going to raise a child alone after being cut off from the family fortune. But I stopped being a daughter the moment my father spoke those words. I became an auditor. They think they know me. They think I'm just Blake, the quiet one, the one who moved to the city and struggles to make ends meet because I drive a sensible sedan and don't wear designer labels like my sister Tiffany. They never asked about my job. Not once in 7 years. If they had, they might have learned that I don't just work in finance. I am the youngest chief financial officer in the history of my firm. I specialize in forensic accounting. I hunt down embezzlement for corporations and audit cartels for the state. I look for the rot in the ledger, and I cut it out. My father thinks he holds the power because he holds the purse strings. He thinks disowning me is a death sentence. He thinks I need his money to survive. He sat there, swirling his expensive wine, smug in his belief that he was cutting off my lifeline. He doesn't realize that I have been reading his balance sheets for months. He doesn't realize that the inheritance he is so desperate to protect for Tiffany is nothing but smoke and mirrors. That box I left on the table? It wasn't a peace offering. It wasn't a sentimental ornament or a picture of an ultrasound. It was a formal service of process, a notice of default and intent to foreclose on the Savannah estate. They were too busy eating prime rib to notice the bank logo on the paperwork inside the wrapping. They were too busy writing me out of a will that has a value of 0 to realize that the roof over their heads doesn't belong to them anymore. It belongs to the bank, and they have exactly 30 days to vacate. I turned onto the main road and accelerated. The engine purred. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel lost. I felt the specific, cold satisfaction of a math problem finally being solved. They wanted to erase me, but they forgot one crucial rule of accounting. You can't erase a debt. You have to pay it. I walked into my condo, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind me, locking out the world. My parents have never been here. They think I rent a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood because I told them I couldn't afford anything else. They don't know that the view from my living room overlooks the entire skyline. They don't know that I own this place outright. To them, I am just Blake, the failure who couldn't find a rich husband like Tiffany did. I poured a glass of water and sat at my island, opening my laptop. The screen glowed. illuminating the spreadsheet I've been building for 5 years. It's a ledger of every dollar I ever sent them. August 12th. $4,000 for emergency roof repairs. Real destination, a cruise to the Bahamas. November 3rd. $2,000 for overdue property taxes. Real destination, a diamond tennis bracelet for Tiffany. I stared at the numbers. Total sunk costs, $112,000. People ask why victims stay. Why smart? Capable women let themselves be bled dry by narcissists. In psychology, they call it the invisible chain. It's a conditioning process where you are taught from birth that your value is transactional. You believe that if you just pay enough, fix enough, and endure enough, you will finally unlock the achievement of being loved. You think there is a magic number that will make them see you. I run billion-dollar audits for Fortune 500 companies. I can spot a shell company in 10 seconds. But I couldn't see the scam happening at my own kitchen table because I was desperate to be the good daughter. That chain snapped 3 months ago. Not because of a fight, but because of a notification. My firm's algorithm flagged a distressed asset in a portfolio we were reviewing. It was a mortgage note, in default. Severe delinquency. Imminent auction status. I looked at the address, and my blood ran cold. It was the Savannah estate. My parents weren't just asking for money for luxuries. They were insolvent. They hadn't paid their actual mortgage in 8 months. I didn't call them. I didn't offer to bail them out again. I realized that saving them was like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. So, I did what I do best. I leveraged my liquidity. I contacted the bank's distressed asset division through a blind LLC I control. I offered to buy the mortgage note for cash. 60 cents on the dollar. The bank was desperate to offload the bad debt. They signed. I didn't buy the house to live in it. I bought the debt so I could control the timeline. For 90 days, I have been the one approving the late notices they threw in the trash. I have been the silent entity they were hiding from. They thought they were outsmarting a faceless bank. They didn't know the bank was sitting across from them at Christmas dinner, waiting for them to take one bite of prime rib before calling the loan due. The invisible chain is gone. I am not their savior anymore. I am their creditor. The foreclosure notice sat on their kitchen table for 3 days. They didn't pack. They didn't call a lawyer. They called the caterers. My phone vibrated across the marble countertop of my island. 17 missed calls from my mother. 12 texts from Tiffany. They weren't asking about the bank logo on the paperwork. They were asking why I hadn't transferred the deposit for the DJ. They were in such deep denial that they had convinced themselves the eviction was a clerical error, a prank, or a glitch in the matrix. They truly believed that if they just ignored the legal summons and threw a big enough party, reality would bend to their will. I silenced the notifications and opened the third monitor in my home office. It was time for the deep dive. I didn't need to guess why they were broke. I needed to know where the bodies were buried. I pulled up the forensic timeline of their finances. I accessed the family trust records, the ones my father swore were locked tight for Tiffany's future. The screen flickered, and the truth bled out in red ink. The trust wasn't just empty. It was negative. 2 years ago, there was a balance of $400,000. Today, 0. I traced the withdrawals. My father hadn't spent it. My mother hadn't spent it. The wire transfers were routed to a shell LLC in Nevada. I ran a skip trace on the entity. It dissolved in 10 seconds. The registered agent wasn't a business partner. It was the Golden Nugget Casino in Atlantic City. The signatory was Tiffany. I sat back, the cold light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The math finally balanced. My parents weren't just bad with money. They were victims of a domestic Ponzi scheme run by their own golden child. Tiffany had embezzled their entire retirement to feed a gambling addiction. And instead of holding her accountable, they had turned to me. They had beaten me down, gaslit me, and demanded my salary not to save the house. But to cover the crimes of the sister they loved more, they were abusing the auditor to pay for the thief. My phone lit up again. A text from my mother. "We forgive you for your little outburst at Christmas. We know you're just jealous of your sister's success. Come to the 40th anniversary gala on Saturday. Don't embarrass us by missing it. Dad has a big announcement regarding the estate." I stared at the message. The arrogance was breathtaking. They were standing in a house they didn't own, spending money they didn't have, planning to announce a legacy that had already been stolen. They thought they were inviting a prodigal daughter back into the fold to be bullied into submission. They didn't realize they were inviting the repo man. I typed a single word in reply: "Okay." I wasn't going to the gala to celebrate. I was going to close the file. I stood in front of my full-length mirror, adjusting the cuffs of my black blazer. I didn't dress for a party. I dressed for a board meeting. I dressed for a hostile takeover. My mother had texted me 3 more times since the invitation. "Wear something festive. No black. And please, fix your face. You looked tired at Christmas." It was fascinating to watch their delusion operate in real time. To them, the foreclosure notice I'd served was just a piece of paper that could be shredded. They believed that if they filled the house with enough expensive flowers, enough important people, the reality of their bankruptcy would simply cease to exist. They thought they could outspend the truth. I picked up my briefcase. Inside, I didn't have a gift. I had a laptop, an HDMI cable, and a hard drive containing the forensic audit of the last 5 years. I also had the original deed to the property, notarized and stamped, listing Nemesis Holdings LLC as the sole owner. I walked out to my car and made the call I had arranged 2 days ago. Chatham County Sheriff's Department. The dispatcher answered. "This is Blake. I'm calling to confirm the civil standby requested for 2847 Oak Avenue tonight at 8 p.m. "Yes, ma'am. Deputy Miller is assigned. He'll meet you at the perimeter." "You have the eviction order?" "I have the order, the deed, and the trespassing notice. The occupants are hosting a large gathering. I expect resistance." "Understood. Wait for the deputy before entering the premises." I hung up. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was property management. The drive to the estate was short. As I turned the corner onto Oak Avenue, the sky lit up. They hadn't just hired a DJ, they had hired a lighting crew. Spotlights swept across the front lawn, illuminating the colonial columns that were currently rotting from termite damage. My father had refused to fix because it was too expensive. Valets were parking Bentleys and Mercedes on the grass I now owned. It was a perfect stage. They had gathered the entire social hierarchy of Savannah to witness their triumph. They wanted an audience for their lie. I pulled my sedan up to the service gate, bypassing the valet. I saw the patrol car idling in the shadows of the old weeping willow. Deputy Miller stepped out. A large man with a face that suggested he had seen enough domestic disputes to have zero patience for drama. "You the owner?" he asked, looking at my deed. "I am. And you want to vacate the premises tonight? During the party?" "They've had 30 days. Deputy, tonight is just the deadline." He nodded, adjusting his belt. "All right, you go in. I'll give you 5 minutes to try and handle it civilly. If it goes south, I'm right behind you." I took a deep breath. The night air smelled of jasmine and impending disaster. I gripped my briefcase tighter and walked toward the sound of the music. They wanted me here to kneel. They wanted to show the world that the rebellious daughter had been brought to heel. They didn't realize that when you invite the auditor to the party is over. I walked into the ballroom, and the noise hit me like a physical wave. The clinking of crystal, the murmur of 200 expensive conversations, the string quartet playing Vivaldi in the corner. My parents had transformed the rotting estate into a palace of light and lies. My mother spotted me near the entrance. She rushed over, her face a mask of aggressive hospitality. "You made it," she hissed, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "Fix your face. The mayor is here. Do not embarrass us." She pulled me toward the front, posing me like a prop. I stood silently, my hand gripping the cold metal of the flash drive in my pocket. "Ladies and gentlemen." My father's voice boomed over the microphone. He stood on a raised platform, holding a glass of champagne high. He looked the part of the benevolent patriarch perfectly. "Thank you for celebrating 40 years of building this legacy. We have faced storms, but we are still standing." The crowd applauded. They didn't know the caterers hadn't been paid. They didn't know the wine was bought on a maxed-out credit card that was 30 days from default. "Tonight," my father continued, beaming at my sister, "I have a special announcement. To ensure this estate remains in the family for generations to come, I am officially transferring the management of the family trust and the deed to this house to our daughter, Tiffany." Tiffany stepped forward, feigning surprise, clutching her chest. The golden child, accepting a crown made of paper. "She is the future of this family," my father declared. "She represents our values." That was my cue. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. I simply walked over to the AV table where a board technician was monitoring the slideshow of family photos. I unplugged the HDMI cable from his laptop and plugged it into mine. The giant screen behind my father flickered. The photo of my parents cutting their wedding cake vanished. In its place, a PDF document appeared. Projected 10 feet tall. Warranty deed. Grantor, Chatham County Sheriff's Office. Grantee, Nemesis Holdings, LC. Date, 90 days ago. The music stopped. The room went deadly silent. You could hear the hum of the projector fan. "What is this?" My father laughed nervously, squinting at the screen. "Technical difficulties." "Folks." I hit the spacebar. The image changed. It was a bank statement. The text was crisp and undeniable. "The Henderson Family Trust. Withdrawal, $200,000. Recipient, the Venetian Resort and Casino. Authorized signatory, Tiffany Henderson." A gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw the mayor lean forward, adjusting his glasses. I picked up the microphone from the stand next to the DJ. My voice was calm, devoid of emotion. It was the voice I used in federal court. "You can't gift a house you don't own, Dad," I said. "And you can't entrust a legacy to a thief." "Cut the mic!" my father screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple. "Security, get her out of here. She's mentally unstable." I hit the spacebar again. A spreadsheet appeared. Forensic audit. 2019 hasta 2024. Total embezzlement by Tiffany Henderson, $450,000. Tiffany let out a shriek that sounded more like a wounded animal than a debutante. She lunged for the laptop. But I stepped back. It's already in the cloud. Tiffany. And in the inbox of the district attorney. Then, I watched it happen. In psychology, we call it the narcissist's collapse. It is the precise moment when a grandiose self-image is punctured by irrefutable reality. The subject cannot process the shame, so they reject the world instead. They choose insanity over accountability. My father didn't look at the screen. He didn't look at the evidence. He looked at the crowd and shouted, "This is a prank. She's jealous. I own this town. I own this house. Actually, sir." A deep voice cut through the hysteria. Deputy Miller stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. He wasn't smiling. He walked onto the stage, his boots heavy on the hardwood. "This is an eviction order," Miller said, handing the paper to my father. "It was served 30 days ago. You are trespassing on private property." "I am Robert Henderson," my father roared, slapping the paper away. "You work for me." Sir. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The silence in the room was absolute. The elite of Savannah watched as the illusion dissolved. They watched the patriarch get spun around and handcuffed in his own ballroom. Tiffany Henderson? Miller asked. Looking at my sister. She was trying to sneak toward the kitchen door. She froze. We have a warrant for wire fraud and elder abuse, based on the evidence provided by the new owner. You're coming with us too. I stood by the projector, watching the math balance out. My mother sat on the floor in her expensive gown, weeping not for her husband, but for the humiliation. The waiters, realizing the party was over, began clearing the champagne glasses. I disconnected my laptop and put it back in my briefcase. The audit was complete. I watched from the balcony of the master suite as the last patrol car turned onto the main road. The red and blue lights washed over the perfectly manicured lawn. The only party favors left after the guests had fled. My mother was the last to leave. She stood by her suitcases on the gravel, looking up at the house she had ruled with terror for 40 years. She looked up at me. I saw her mouth move, forming my name. Perhaps a plea. Perhaps a curse. I didn't try to read her lips. I didn't wave. I simply reached inside the French doors and flipped the switch. The exterior floodlights died, plunging her into darkness. I turned my back and locked the door. I blocked their numbers that night. I didn't block them out of anger. I blocked them because the audit was closed. When a liability becomes toxic, you don't negotiate with it. You write it off. 6 months later, the estate looks different. I'm sitting in the garden under the weeping willow. The rotting columns have been repaired. The silence here isn't heavy anymore, it's peaceful. My daughter, now 3 months old, is sleeping in her carrier beside me. She will never know what it feels like to be a scapegoat. She will never know the sound of a raised hand or the sting of a conditional love. She will only know safety. I didn't keep the house for myself. I live in the carriage house now. The main mansion has been repurposed. It is the headquarters for the Legacy Foundation, a nonprofit I established to teach financial literacy and legal self-defense to women escaping economic abuse. The ballroom where my father tried to have me arrested is now a lecture hall where women learn how to protect their assets from people like him. My parents are currently living in a motel 3 towns over. Tiffany is awaiting trial for wire fraud and elder abuse. They send letters, sometimes, forwarded by their public defender, asking for money, asking for family. I put them directly into the shredder. People tell me I'm lucky. They say I inherited a fortune. They don't understand the balance sheet. I didn't inherit anything. I bought my freedom at market price. It cost me my parents. It cost me the illusion of a happy childhood. It cost me $112,000 in sunk costs before I woke up. But as I look at my daughter sleeping in the shade, I know the math works out. They thought I was an asset they could liquidate whenever they needed cash. They forgot that in the end, I'm the one who balances the books. And my ledger is finally in the black. If you've ever had to audit your own life to find your peace, share this story. And tell me in the comments, what is the one boundary you need to set today?